Civil Society and Human Security Research Unit, which I direct. And I'm going to put directly to him some questions which were actually put to Dorsu, but I'm going to put the pre-submitted questions to him. And the first one is from Amal de Chichera of the Equal Rights Trust. Stateless people around the world require the protection of their home countries and of the international community in order to live secure and dignified lives. The escalating conflict between Rohingya and Rakhine in North Rakhine State is a sad reminder of the extent to which stateless persons are vulnerable to human rights abuse. What steps could be taken to integrate the Rohingya and other stateless persons into Burmese society to prevent conflicts of this kind recurring in the future and to ensure they have a role to play in the country's journey towards democracy? And a question from Peter Bamford. I'm not going to read it all because it's rather long, but basically he says that when he spoke to the military, one of the main justifications for military rule was that without strong military rule of the country, it would break up into different ethnic groups. So and was Burma, he asks, an artificial creation of the former imperial leaders? And how could civil democratic government overcome such entrenched ethnic divisions?
Yeah. Let me preface my response by saying that I'm speaking not only as a scholar and activist, but as a Burmese, formerly stateless myself, as a refugee for 15 years in the US, traveling on refugee document. So I know from my experience the type of vulnerabilities that stateless people, far more downtrodden than I ever was, experience. At least, that's where I'm coming from. I think the most important thing on the statelessness is to understand the statelessness as something produced by the states, not by the people or community. We need to make a very clear distinction. Statelessness is a product of states, not the communities and people. Of course, the states may mobilize ethno-religious prejudices or in some cases hatred in order to advance its political calculations or ends. But fundamentally, statelessness is the problem that is created by the states. And in some ways, it's similar to, our dear friend Johan Galton conceptualized, poverty as structural violence. Actually, statelessness is the structural violence. And this is where the domestic, societal tendencies as well as illiberal regimes and, somewhat backward international conceptions of what people are or communities are. And let me just explain. In the specific case of the Burmese or Rohingya people, and in a lot of people question where they come from or who they are, who is Rohingya and who is not, who is Bengali, are they to be considered a nationality, or have they been stripped of the nationality standing that they got, back in 1950s? So those questions aside, I think this is the area where larger universal principles of human rights and human dignity come into violent conflict with domestic national sovereignty conceptions and ideas. Because, if you look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 15, it is very specifically stated that every person will have a right to a nationality. In other words, every person will be granted, just by the mere fact that he or she is a human being, a place of belongingness. And then statelessness it's basically about people without soil underneath their feet, as it were. Yeah? And then so I think, as a Burmese, when I read or hear news about the stateless Rohingya people, my immediate question is why are they treated not as human beings, but as hunted, fugitive, unwanted, undesired on our soil? Especially, I think it is very disturbing as a Burmese as well, with a profound Buddhist upbringing. We're a society that is supposed to thrive on and build ourselves on the principles of compassion And why is it that we who have fought so hard and still yet to accomplish the institution of human rights in our country, unable to extend that entitlement to this population? And then, and I think on the practical question of how do we move forward? Well, the way to move forward is not to multiply more nationalities. We already have 130 because it's convenient for the military regime to have so many, because all authoritarian regimes resort to the old divide and rule. And so we don't, in my personal opinion, I don't think we should support the clamor for granting Rohingyas a nationality. However, categorically, we should support initiatives that would ensure the dignified treatment of this population, citizenship, permanent residency. And finally, I think the Burmese society, the Burmese human rights community itself has to come to terms with the fact that there are illiberal tendencies within our own movement, our own society. It's nothing to be ashamed of. We must not deny that there are illiberal tendencies within our own society, not just the illiberal regime. And so I think a useful principle would be human security as a notion. We need to understand that security and well-being of individuals and communities are equally, if not more, important than the national security. I'll stop.
That's great. And I also, a wonderful answer too. And I also want to ask, a follow-on question, which comes from Dr. Jonathan,
the military bit.
Bonitcha. To what extent have grassroots environmental movements, for example, the campaign against the Myitsone Dam, provided a way for communities to assert their rights against the government of Myanmar?
Well, I mean, a lot of you would know that Myitsone Dam was a $3 billion project that was instituted jointly by the Burmese regime and the Chinese electricity company. Along the lines that electricity should be traded across national boundaries. That this is all part of this free marketizing Asia. The formerly communist or leftist countries are now under pressure to open their borders for trading everything from drinking water to natural gas and electricity. And so this is the issue that had galvanized people like Dosu herself, as well as the grassroots communities across all sectors, including within the Burmese regime. And then so there are, this issue, the successful campaign to at least get the Myitsone Dam project suspended, indicates that the Burmese society there, despite its flaws, is capable of coming together for a common purpose. So that defeats the, that refutes categorically the military's claim that, people are so divided, ethnic divisions are so entrenched, therefore, only the military can keep this country with an iron fist in order for the country from balkanizing. Yeah? And over the past 50 years, my final comments is that the military has 50 years of opportunities to resolve, any type of ethnic conflicts. And, the civilian parliamentarians only had 1 decade to resolve the ethnic conflicts, and political conflicts. And the military has failed to make the best use of their 50 years in power. And in my personal view, because of their totalitarian or neo-totalitarian orientation, the military isn't after peace on equal terms. They are after peace on their own terms. So as I speak today, there's war going on in northern Kachin state between the Kachins, who had 14 years of peace deal with the military, and these wars are not simply motivated by ethno-nationalistic sentiments. There is a political economy of conflict there. If you look at the so-called minority areas, Those are the areas that are very rich in resources and that are considered buffer states by the central state. And so I think this is a very, very important issue, and we must not buy into this concept that only the military can hold the country together.
Thank you very much. And now finally we come back to Dorsoo, which everyone has been waiting for. Would you like to comment at all on any of these points?
Yes, the theme of this discussion today is rule of law, and I think it was very, very good that we started with Professor LSE, because what you said about procedure and substance, I think, can be used as a basis for addressing all the other issues that have been discussed. You mentioned the fact that procedure is particularly important in times of transition. And this is so because it's through procedure that you can see whether justice has been done, seen to be done. So this is very important. And substance is also important because, of course, there are laws in Burma which are obsolete, which are not suited to the times, and these have to be addressed. Now, transition, you were talking about transition, and that goes with procedure. What kind of procedures are we going to use? You mentioned the fact that time will not heal, that Archbishop Desmond Tutu said, the time will not heal. There has to be acknowledgement. And how is this acknowledgement going to be made? That is a procedural matter. What sort of procedures are we going to follow? Are we going to go for a commission of inquiry of the kind perhaps that will be started by an external body, such as the United Nations Commission for Human Rights, or is it something that is going to be internal? These also are procedural matters. How are we going to handle these issues? Now, even the discussion of statelessness in Burma, we can base it on rule of law. There are two aspects to this. First, the laws of citizenship. Then that substance. What are the laws of citizenship in Burma like? Are these just? Are these in line with internationally acceptable standards? So that is one issue. And the other is procedural. How do the immigration authorities work? How do the police work? How do the courts work? These two together are essential if we are to find out exactly why stateless persons are stateless and whether there is not something that can be done to assure their position within the rule of law. So the reason why I've emphasized rule of law so much in my political work is because this is what we all need if we are to really proceed towards democracy. Unless people see that justice is being done, unless justice is done and seen to be done, we cannot believe in genuine reform. We have to know that reform is based on rule of law. Reform should be applied equally. Reform should not be used to protect a certain group or to promote another group. This is why, even with the Myitsone Dam, I think it's a little different from rule of law. It's more good governance, but I think you have to link good governance to rule of law. You can't divorce one from the other. With the Myitsone Dam project, we don't know exactly what's in these contracts that have been drawn up between the Burmese government and Chinese business. And this is where the problems begin. The people only knew after the work had started that they didn't like what was going on. But the fact that this project has been suspended for 5 years certainly does not bring an end to the problem at all. What happens at the end of 5 years? What is in those contracts? I don't know, and I think the great majority of people in Burma do not know. And I think that there, although in a way you could say that this is to do with good governance, that is to say transparency and accountability, you could say that it has something to do with rule of law as well. How, under the law, a government should proceed with regard to contracts with foreign enterprises. And you talked about investment. I've spoken recently about democracy-friendly, human rights-friendly investment. I think investors must take responsibility for the results of the business that they do inside our country. It's not just environmental consciousness, but also a consciousness of long-term results, of possible long-term results. For example, we want to encourage investment that will create jobs, because unemployment is a big problem in our country. And we also want to promote the kind of investment which will bring in vocational training, train the people to take up the jobs that will be created. Because of our extremely poor education system, our young people are not trained to find employment. There's no employment to begin with, but even if jobs are created, the great majority of our young people just can't go into them straight away. They have to be trained to take up these jobs. And the kind of scrutiny that is needed with regard to foreign investment can also be linked to rule of law. In fact, it is linked to rule of law. We cannot escape from rule of law. This was the main plank of our election manifesto, our by-election manifesto: rule of law, end to ethnic conflict, and amendments to the Constitution. The reason why we put rule of law first is because we do not think that we can achieve the other two without the foundation of rule of law. Because ethnic conflict has a lot to do with lack of justice. And of course, justice is linked to rule of law. And amendments to the Constitution. If we are to meet the aspirations of the ethnic nationalities, this Constitution will have to be amended to harmonize with those aspirations. This present Constitution does not harmonize with our aspirations. That is to say, we who are not, we are ethnic Burmese, but who wish for a democratic Constitution, nor does it harmonize with the aspirations of the other ethnic nationalities who are minority in the sense that there are fewer of each of the other nationalities than are of the Burmese ethnic nationality. Unless we amend the Constitution to harmonize with the aspirations of all of the people in our country, we will never be able to bring about the kind of unity and peace that we all desire. So it all comes down to rule of law. Amendments to the Constitution, of course, is very much to do with law. It's to do with substance as well as procedure, because amendment to the Constitution is to do with procedure. We have a very rigid Constitution, whereby to make any amendments, more than 75% of the members of the National Assembly must agree to these amendments. Now, since 25% are military nominees, that means that all the civilian members of the National Assembly must agree, plus at least one military officer. But don't forget that the great majority of the civilian members of Parliament are from the USDP party, which is the party created by the previous military regime. So you can imagine how difficult it is going to be to have the Constitution amended. Perhaps then you might want to ask me, then, do we think it can be amended? Yes, we think so, because we think that it is possible to work together with the military to make them understand why we think that this Constitution will not move us in a positive direction. By us, I don't mean the National League for Democracy, I mean the whole country. So that the reason why I ask that rule of law be discussed today is for all these other reasons, that the progress that we hope to make with regard to democratization and reform depends so much on an understanding of the understanding and acceptance of the importance of rule of law.
Well, thank you very much. And that's a good thing. We should continue this discussion somehow, somewhere. We just have time for 2 questions from the floor. That's all we've got time for, unfortunately. So could I see who would like to ask a question. There are hundreds of people, and I can't...
But they're the one with the spectacles.
Okay, the one with the spectacles who's waving at me.
Thank you very much. I feel so privileged to ask you some of my present questions.
Could you say who you are? It's nice to know.
Yeah, my name is Kunong. I'm a Kachin ethnic and from northern Burma. So, dear Aung San Suu Kyi, as you have said, the democratic reform should be comprehensive, not to be, just on one part, on why, the war is going on in the other part. So, my question is, as someone, who wrote Freedom from Fear and being a symbol of courage and the non-resistance movement at home and abroad, why are you reluctant to publicly condemn the Burmese military regime's military offensive against Kachin civilians, which has resulted in more than 80,000 Kachin refugees and RDPs on the Kachin and Kachin-China border? And another related question.
I think, that's a big question.
All right, well, let me answer this. When you say that, why don't I condemn the military? I condemn all violence, not just on the part of the Burmese military, but on the part of all other groups that go in for violence. We have said very clearly with regard to the fighting going on in the Kachin state that to begin with, we need independent observers to find out what is actually going on, because there are different accusations coming in from different directions. We stand very much with the people of the Kachin state. I was telling the members of the Burmese community whom I met this morning that one of the good things that has come out of this conflict is how supportive the ethnic Burmese are of the Kachin refugees. It's not just my party, but individual Burmese and individual Burmese organizations which have been putting together the funding to send to the refugees because they sympathize so much with them. But when it comes to condemnation, we want to know what's happening more clearly before we condemn one party or the other. The fighting is not just taking place on one side. I understand that Burmese military forces have gone into territory which previously was agreed to be under the supervision of the KIO. But when we asked how matters stood, when we asked, for example, the UN High Commission for Human Rights, when we asked the United Nations agencies, they said they cannot say for sure because they have not been allowed to go in as independent observers. So resolving conflict is not about condemnation. It is about finding out the roots, the causes of that conflict, and finding out how it can be resolved in the best way possible.
Now, one last question from the lady at the front. The frontmost one.
Rachel Goldwyn, former political prisoner in Insane. My question is about how can the international community support the creation of a space to discuss the reform of the security sector, being both the Tatmadaw and also of the ethnic armed groups?
Good question.
By the security sector, do you mean the military as well as the police? Well, this will have to be part of the whole reform of the system. There are good rules with regard to both the military and the police. It's just that the rules have not been followed. For example, the military has, as you all know in the past, been guilty of shooting civilians. Now, if we consider the laws of Burma, there is such a thing as aid to civil power, which lays down very clearly under what circumstances the military can come in to control civilian crowds. But these laws, these rules and regulations have been totally ignored. So it's not just substance, it's also procedure. And what kind of space? By space, do you mean that civil society organizations discussing the matter, educating the military forces, educating the police forces. It's a very broad subject. Civil service society organizations certainly will not be allowed to go in and educate the military, that I can tell you. But I think we can do a lot of work with regard to the courts of justice and to the police forces, and I think the international community could help by offering proper training for police officers. That is one practical way of going about it.
Gosh, we could keep discussing these things for such a long time. I'm going to ask you one last question that was sent to me that came from a student called Lena, I don't know where she's from, Gatas Bultaif, and she says in her question, what is the source of strength to keep you fighting for Burma?
Well, you, I suppose. During this journey, I have found great warmth and great support among peoples all over the world. This journey didn't start on the 13th when I came to Europe, but on the 29th of last month when I went to Thailand. And I was surprised and very touched by the warmth with which the Thais welcomed me as though I were one of them. And this I have found in Switzerland, in Norway, yesterday evening in Ireland for a brief 6 hours or so, and now here in England. So I think it's all of you and people like you who have given me the strength to continue. And I suppose I do have a stubborn streak in me.
Thank you, everybody. And do you realise that today, and it's so nice of Dorsu to come, it's her birthday. 67. So happy birthday. Where is Judith Rees? Go on, start it. Shall we sing? Shall we sing Happy Birthday?
Raz, I know that you don't want to hear from me, but can I do one housekeeping thing before I give a vote of thanks? And that's to say, after the event, could you please stay in your seats so that the platform party can actually get out? Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure for me to be here. I've enjoyed the event, and I hope I can speak for everybody here. I want to thank every one of the people on the panel for their thoughts and insights into this very, very important issue. And I hope the other panelists will forgive me for focusing a little on Dorsu. Right? So we are very honoured and very pleased that you were able to accept the invitation to be here in what I know is a very, very busy schedule that you have. Your trip linked to the UK will go down in history, and I'm sure it's probably quite an emotional trip for you. Yeah. At LSE, when we have distinguished guests, we always do two things, and I'm going to ask Alex here, who is the Secretary General of the Students' Union, to present you first with two things and then something a little special. So the first thing is the official certificate of this event. The second thing, and don't ask me why we do this, but it started with Nelson Mandela, and every distinguished guest since then has been given a baseball cap. However, we don't end it there because today, as Mary has told you, it is Dao Su's birthday. And we found a picture taken of your father when he was in London in 1947. And I don't know whether you will have seen it before, but we certainly thank our friends at the British Museum and also the library. Sure, everybody in this room is conscious of how many birthdays Dao Su spent not free. And so it's a great joy today that she does spend this birthday in freedom and with us. Okay. We are also, I think, very conscious that Burma has started on a long road. And as you, I think, reminded everybody in Stockholm, the transition is going to take some time before there is the rule of law and justice for all. We are going in a minute to all of us sing happy birthday to you. And we would like that not to be just a tribute to you, but to all those people who have campaigned for freedom within Burma and for all of the Burmese people. So, can I ask you
Sorry, it was my fault.
to thank Aung San Suu Kyi and to stand up and sing. Now, yesterday, Bono apparently sang to her. Now, we might not have quite that star quality, but let us see whether we can be even more robust. And thank you. Thank you. Where's the music?
Thank you all very much.
You can take that.